Looking to take your financial knowledge to the next level? You're in the right place. Welcome to Ask Ralph, offering accounting, technical, and financial advice. Whether you're looking to save taxes or improve your business, he's got you covered. Here's your host of Ask Ralph, Ralph Eastup Jr.
Hello and welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show. Today we're going to talk about a topic of renting to own. I don't get this question a lot, but now that we're seeing an increase in interest rates, I think we might start seeing more of this type of thing. And there was an article that ran in the News Journal this past Sunday. It was actually from a woman named Beth Baczynski of NerdWallet, and she asked a very simple question: is a rent-to-own home right for you? Well, it really depends. So let's talk about some of the things she brings out in this article. First thing she says, are they legitimate? Well, yes, they're legitimate. But the thing you need to understand is they can be tricky, and there's a possibility of losing money. So let's talk about, in general, in case you don't know, how does a rent-to-own work? Well, rent-to-own arrangements are complex, but starting one can be as simple as signing a lease. The difference between a traditional lease and a rent-to-own is this thing called the option to buy clause. Now, you need to be careful. Things he mentions here is there's really two things. There's an option to buy clause or a obligation to buy agreement. Now, the clause of option to buy outlines the terms of your purchase of the home when the lease ends, which is typically 1 to 3 years. See, a lot of times what these things will be is there an opportunity to sort of clean up your credit and go and get the traditional financing. So a person who is potentially, maybe they've had their house on the market for a long time, and it's not selling the way they would have expected it to. Well, they may all of a sudden have their listing agent change that to rent-to-own possibilities. And then what basically happens is you'll pay a certain amount for rent. In addition to that, you're going to pay a certain amount over and above that, which is, basically your escrow money or your down payment money. You have to be careful that you're not signing an obligation to buy agreement because there's no flexibility to change your mind. Now, either one of those, you're going to pay a certain premium on top of your monthly rent. The extra money is stashed. Now, the thing she mentions here is preferably in an escrow account to become your down payment. Now, why is this a beneficial thing? Well, it will lock down the purchase price. And that on its surface seems like a good thing if we're in a position where prices are rising. It's the economy we're in right now. I think that's a fair estimate. But the problem is if you lock into this and we're in an economy where housing values are dipping, you may run into a problem. Now, a lot of people would say, well, Ralph, it doesn't matter at that point because, once the property gets appraised and they see that the property is not worth what you're asking to be paid for, well, then I can just walk away and get my money back. Maybe not. So you need to take a look at that agreement. So should you rent to own? If you can't qualify for a mortgage because of credit issues or lack of a down payment, a rent-to-own arrangement might get the homeownership process started sooner. Be careful of this, though. A rent-to-own property allows time to repair or establish your credit while your monthly premiums build equity in the future home. So here's the little caveat to that. You still have to finance the rest of the purchase price when the lease ends, and if you can't, you're likely going to forfeit any premiums or that money you paid extra on top of the rent. So you need to have some confidence in the ability to get a mortgage at the front end. So this is not meant for the person who is never going to qualify for a mortgage. It's a bad plan if you do that. But let's say, for example, you've got a couple of bumps on your credit report and you're not quite qualifying for your mortgage. Or let's say you need to have a little bit more money for down payment. This may be a very good option for you. But if, however, you're the person who hasn't done anything good with your credit, if you're not going to have enough money to settle, it's probably not a great plan because you're going to end up losing that extra money that you paid in on top of your rent. So how can you avoid some of the common scams? So apparently this is an area for scams. And these things can cost you money. So here's some tips that they give in this article to avoid these scams. Number one, research average market rents. What they mean here is that make sure you're paying the market value of the rent because it's a red flag otherwise. So let's say you're looking at a house and the person says, okay, look, and I'm going to do a rent to own. but you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and, let's say the rent is $1,500 a month. Rather than charge you extra, I'm going to go ahead and take the $1,500 a month and I'm going to apply $500 towards the escrow or that earnest money, that rent to own piece. Well, you got to ask yourself the question, why would this person be willing to rent this property for less than what they could get if they just rented it without the option to purchase? Something that should be a big red flag. Another thing you want to avoid is don't pay or offer personal information up front. This is where you might see, for example, like a Craigslist ad that says, they may ask you for a deposit or sensitive information. Let me get your social security number so I can run your credit before I do this. Don't provide either of these things until you've seen the property and really come up with an agreement. Which brings us to the next point. Inspect the seller and the home. Be sure the seller owns the home and is current on mortgage payments and property taxes. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't do the normal things. And I think you should look at this as if you were doing a regular purchase. Now, things it mentions here is have the home professionally inspected and appraised. A lot of people don't think about that, but that's something I would definitely recommend you do. And you also need to know what you're signing. Getting out of a rent-to-own agreement is difficult, so you need to carefully examine, and what they mention here, and I 100% agree, have an attorney review this before you sign it. If you're dealing with a reputable person who is entering into this agreement with you for a lease purchase, they shouldn't object to you working with an attorney. It's just going to protect you and it's going to protect them. So there's absolutely no reason not to do that. And you've got to look at the fine print. And this is where an attorney is going to come into play and, give you the options you need so that if something happens, you're able to make the best decision. Like we talked about a little earlier, what happens if the property value goes down? What does the agreement say will happen when you have a position where the property value goes down? Because the truth is, you may qualify for a mortgage at that point, but we both know that getting a mortgage is going to require an appraisal. So that's why they also mention in this, in this issue to go and get an appraisal done. Know what you're dealing with. And you also have to look at the time horizon. If you get an appraisal today and this lease purchase ends after 1 year, then maybe you're okay. But if you go get that appraisal today and the lease purchase is a 3 or a 5 year deal, that can be problematic because who knows what that property is going to do. I mean, you could hope that the property would go up in value and then, perhaps that's a great deal for you then. But what if it doesn't? What if it stays the same or what if it even goes down in value? So these are all ideas that, come about in this whole idea is a rent to own home right for you. And again, just to kind of go through this again, look at your circumstances. Will you eventually qualify for a mortgage? Will the property be of value? And then, the person you're dealing with, are they going to actually put this money aside into some sort of escrow account so that they'll have that money when you go to settle later on?
You've been listening to Ask Ralph, brought to you by Saggio Accounting Plus. Please subscribe to and rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating and review. Our podcast is produced by Carolyn Peters. Thank you for listening and be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Ask Ralph Media. You can also hear me each week on 1450 WILM and on 1410 WDOV in Delaware and on the iHeartRadio app. Submit your questions or ideas for future shows by sending an email to AskRalph@AskRalph.com.
The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.